most organizations do realize the importance of data-driven decision-making for their businesses. But when it comes to practicing and implementing those things, that's where the struggle comes. So there's a small number of organizations that considers themselves to be part and of the data-driven culture and trying to successfully adopt that culture. But there is an increasing number of organizations aspiring to be data-driven. So they haven't successfully adopted the culture, but they aspire to be data-driven. However, there are challenges that are inhibiting them from doing that. And those were mentioned in the chats, whether they don't know which data to use. They don't know if the integrity of the data is good enough to inform business decisions making, and how to even collect that data if there's no data to analyze as yet. Yeah. So here we're looking at the importance of data visualization. And so there are different types of ways of communicating data, and data visualization is one of them, but there's many ways in which you can communicate information or data. Today, we're just focusing on data visualization. And so data visualization, it's the process of transforming information or a set of data set into a visual. It can be a heat map, a line graph, a bar chart, or any other visual that you choose to use, but it's you're translating your information into a visual. And then data visualization is used interchangeably with information graphics, information visualization, and statistical graphics. But I just want to know to note that there is a difference between information graphics and data visualization. But in this presentation, we're just going to use the two terms interchangeably. But just note that there is a difference between information graphics or infographics and data visualization. So data visualization can just be a graph with some icons and a heading. And then whereas information graphics or infographics is like, it has text, it has images, and then it also has elements of data visualization, which can be a graph or an icon or so forth, and a text. So an information graphic takes you through a story and it has a narrative, whereas a data visualization can just be information that is presented in a meaningful way, and you'll be able to get the narrative without having to use text. And then, so data visualization aids with easier understanding for the human brain, because if you're looking at just the numbers, if it's qualitative or quantitative data, whether you're looking at words or numbers, it's not easy to understand the meaning of that data set when it's just sitting there. But when it's visualized, it's easier for the human brain to understand and grasp. And another thing is that data visualization, it highlights existing patterns, trends, outliers, and it also pulls insights from large data sets. And those are patterns and trends and outliers that you wouldn't necessarily see with your naked eye when you're just looking at the data. The aim of data visualization is to identify, locate, manipulate, format, and deliver data in the most efficient way possible to drive data decision-making in a business. So here it's the benefits of data visualization. And the first benefit, and these are some of the benefits, it's not all the benefits, but I'm just highlighting like top 5 benefits of using a data visual. So number one is that it unlocks key values. So a visual tells a good story by transforming data into a visual, and that will be easy to understand by everyone in your organization. So people that may have experience with working with data, or people that do not have experience with data. So everyone in the organization will be able to understand the key values that you're trying to communicate with your visual. And then the second one is identifying existing patterns and trends. So as I've mentioned in the previous slides, it's very difficult to see patterns and trends that exist in the data set without visualizing it. So even if you are coming up with a model for a data set, or you're trying to predict future values for your business or anything, you'll need to visualize whatever findings that you find from a data set, so that everyone is able to understand. Which leads me to the third part, that it is easy to understand. When you see a visual, you're able to immediately see what is being communicated. You're able to pick up patterns, you're able to pick up trends, and you're able to pick up relationships between different variables that are being shown on the visual. And also a visual is attractive, depending on what you're trying to communicate and the type of visual that you use. So it's attractive and it encourages user engagement. So if it's visually attractive, people normally want to know more about what you're trying to say, because the visual is inviting for the user. And the last one is that visualizing your data is able to display complex relationships in your data. So let's say you have a very large data set with like more than 200 variables. So that will be difficult to visualize with your normal bar chart or a line chart. So sometimes you need to make use of visuals, different visuals, to show hierarchy in your data and the relationships, complex relationships that exist in your large data set. And then here I'm just giving you an example of a data visual. It's here on the right, and this visual speaks to the global fertility rate. And this is a projection, a future projection using historical data to see the number of children that each woman will have in the near future, in future. So they use historical data from 1990 up until 2015. And then from there, it's a projection from 2045 to 2100 to see how many children each woman would have. And it's just a projection based on historical data. So from this visual, you can see that it invites exploration. From the first moment you see it, there's a big heading at the top saying global fertility rate, and then it just draws you in. And also there's data points, it delivers data points. You see that from 1990 to 1995, it was each woman would have 3 children, and then 2.5 in 2010 to 2015, because it's an average. So, and on average, a woman will have 2.5 children. So it's between 2 and 3. And then down to 2095, where it's 2 children per woman. So you can see all the data points that are being presented and the message that they're trying to drive across. And it's easy to understand. You're able to understand this information because of the use of the different icons. So if you isolate everything else, you'll just see that this is a bar chart. but they didn't stop at the bar chart. They included your data points and also the use of icons so that you are able to understand the information that is being presented. And also you're able to analyze the data in a meaningful way. And another thing about this visual is that it is memorable. If they just chose the bar graph, it's just a bar graph. We've seen many bar graphs, but this is, you will remember this visual. Even if someone decides to adopt it for something else, you would still remember that I first saw this visual from the global fertility rate poster. So it's very memorable while driving the message across. And then another example is of an infographic. So an infographic also presents key information or perspective. And then this specific infographic is about women that are living with HIV. So it tells a story about women that are living with HIV. So from the beginning, from the top section, it tells you about women that are living with HIV. And you also have data points. It says around 1 in 4 people living with HIV is a woman. And then the second part now breaks it down according to the different ethnic groups. And then lastly, here they tell you about the treatment for those women that are living with HIV. So it takes you through a story, takes you through a journey, and tells you a very detailed story with data points. And they also make use of visuals to drive the story across. And this is also very memorable. And then the last example of a data visual is a dashboard. And you see that this is very different to the first two. And so a dashboard, you use it when you're trying to visualize a lot of multiple data points or indicators or variables in one view. So you see here, this is your key indicators, whatever key indicators that the project is focusing on. So it's on your left. And then here, it's highlighting the trends, and it gives a breakdown of the key indicators that you're tracking over a period of time. And then these are other indicators that they're looking at. And then the last part is focusing on the top 3 indicators that you're tracking. So it's multiple data points in one view, but it's structured in a way that you are able to see the different sections, what the different sections are focusing on. And the nice thing about a dashboard is that you're able to interact and explore the data that is being presented. So a typical dashboard will have like filters. You'll have filters at the top here, just didn't include that part. We'll have filters where you're able to filter by an entity. So if you were looking at this at, let's say, a global level, the project is running at a global level, this will be a view of the global level. But if you want to go down to a provincial or regional or a specific entity, you are able to do that with a dashboard. You're able to interact with your data. So those are the 3 examples of data visualizations. But I'd like to pause here again before I move into the next section, and just know, just get a feeling from the group if they have noticed a difference, if there's a difference between the 3 examples that I just showed you, and what do you think is applicable? So what scenarios would you use these visuals for in your organization? It's an infographic, it's a data visual, and a dashboard. So what is the difference? That's the first part. What is the difference between these 3 visuals, and what would you use these three different visuals for?
Great, thank you. So Sue is asking, what is the heading of the dashboard? So you could share that. And then Jerusha might have answered some of your questions in the comment side, but we'd still like to actually hear from everyone. So please, if you want to put your hand up or type in the chat box.
Welcome, Jerusha. So there is no heading for the dashboard. It's just an example, just to show an example of how the dashboard looks. But there's no heading. It can be project update. So we can give it that heading.
Okay, so Jennifer says the first two are static and the dashboard allows interactivity, and we use all three.
Okay.
Jerusha saying it looks like a web stats dashboard around giving web interactive things, data. Ollie says data visualization is just displaying the data, and data infographics is more interpretive. Karen, a dashboard might present more of a 360-degree view, and the first to hone in on a specific issue or focus.
Yes. All right. Thank you for those responses. Jerusha, please let me know on the time, because it's difficult to present and keep time as well.
You're doing well on time?
Okay. And then the next part is data visualization practices. And in this section, I'm going to focus on what you should do and what you shouldn't do, the good and the bad, and things to look out for when you're visualizing your data. So I'll present on the first half of this section, and Jerusha will take over the last section. So highlighted here is the steps and the journey that you would typically follow when you're visualizing information. So the first one is choosing, and you first need to make a choice, and that choice will be informed by context. So you need to understand your context, so your audience and the message that you're trying to communicate. So there's a messaging and the targeted audience. So those your choice will be informed by those two. And then the second step is now going to create. So when you create your visual, you need to choose an appropriate visual to display that data or information. And so you're creating your visual, making use of different platforms and tools. So the mediums that you use, the use of headings to make sure that whatever you're creating is visually appealing, and lastly, the data that is available to you. The third step is improve. So after you choose the message and the audience and the data that you would use and headings and the medium that you would use to analyze your data or visualize your data, you then need to improve on it and eliminate any clutter and focus on what is important. So that is where you start your editing. So the use of font, images, and alignment of your graphs, your images, and text. And then the fourth step is emphasize. So you need to think like a designer and make use of the space that's available to you and icons and any text to make sure that whatever that you're producing drives the message across with impact and meaning. And then the last step is delivering and telling a story. So once you're done with choosing, creating, improving, and emphasizing, you will tell and deliver a story. So step one is someone has unmuted the mic. Is there a question? Okay. All right. All right, thanks. So the first one is choosing, as I have mentioned. So you choose the audience. So the targeted audience, the message that you are communicating, and the data that is available. Is there data? You need to see if there's data available to convey the message that you're trying to communicate. So yeah, I'm focusing on the audience, and you need to choose, first thing, you need to choose your audience, and you need to clearly define who your audience is. And just saying that this report or this visual is for internal or stakeholder is not enough. So you need to be specific about your audience, whoever is the targeted audience. So in the internal stakeholders, it's a lot of people. You have your CEO, you have HR, you have project implementers, and so forth. So a report for those 4 different people would not be the same. So it needs to be tailored to a specific audience. Yeah, and also when you're creating a visual, it can be a report, a financial year-end report would not look like, let's say, a post that you would put on social media. So you need to choose and clearly define your audience. And then the second thing that you choose is the message. So here it's a pyramid approach of telling a story, and it's an inverted pyramid. So that's the approach. So you lead with the most important information. That's the first thing that you should lead with in your presentation or your visual, so that the most important information is at the beginning, and it draws your audience, because they'll find it interesting and they would want to know more because it's at the top, it's there to see. So this approach of the inverted pyramid can be used to structure your messaging. So the first part is your most important information at the top, the who, what, when, and how. Then the second part will be the less important information, like your background and all of that. And you should still reveal facts in order of importance. And then the third part is a code or information followed by your ending. And also the message that you are communicating will also inform how this is structured. And then the last thing that you need to choose is the data. So after clearly defining your audience and the message that you're communicating, you need to decide on which available data to use. So which available data is best to use to communicate your point. So you have 2 different types of data sets. You can have your primary data or your secondary data. So the primary data is the data that you would have directly collected from the source. And the secondary one is readily available data on websites or that data that someone has already collected and analyzed. So that's the first part, the first step. So you need to choose your, what is the first one? You need to choose your audience, message, and data. And then step 2, after choosing your audience and message and data, you start creating. So you choose the appropriate visual. You need to choose the appropriate visual to display the data, because now you know what data you have. So you decide on the medium to analyze and visualize the data so that it is easy for your audience to understand. And then the second part is the use of headings and text to highlight key information. And then the last part is the data. You have chosen your data. So now you need to see how best to present it, the data that you have chosen to use. So here it's the different mediums that you can use. It's not all of them, but this is just the 4 that are mostly used to make sure that whatever that you're presenting is easy for your audience to read. So the first one is a PowerPoint presentation, which we may all be familiar with. And the nice thing about PowerPoint is that it can link data sets. It is easy to navigate, and you have design tools in PowerPoint. So this is for presentation, and these last 3, PictoChart, Visme, and Canva, web-based graphic design tools for creating infographics. And they come with templates, and PictoChart and Visme have an online interaction. You have additional photos, shapes, icons, and tools, and they're user-friendly. How they market them is that you don't need any experience with analyzing data or any graphic design experience. You just go there and you'll be able to create an infographic that looks very professional in just an hour. And Canva, it's different from PictoChart and Visme because it is specifically for social media pages. So if you want to create your posters for social media, logos, videos, and visuals, other visual content, Canva is your best option. And all these, except for PowerPoint, all of these platforms, they have a free version. So I think PictoChart and Visme and Canva, so 80% of the content is free. You can use it on a free version. And then I guess once you get to know what's available and what's not available, you can then update to a pro license to get 100% of the content that is available, but 80% should be able to suffice. And then with PowerPoint, you will need a Microsoft license. And then the second part under creating is your data. I'll circle back to headings towards the end. I'm just going to focus on the data now. So once you choose your data and you know what data to analyze to address a specific information, a specific data point or information that you're trying to convey, you need to choose a visual. And then these are some of the examples of how to present your data based on the need. So first here, you have a bar chart and a line chart. And these are used mainly when you want to compare values in your data set. And then here, when you want to analyze trends, you can use a line chart or a bar chart. So basically, you need to know what visual. So once you know, if you're trying to compare values or you're analyzing trends, you need to know whether you are doing one of the two. Then from there, you choose your visual. So when you want to know the relationship or correlations between your data set, you can use a line chart again, scatter plot or bubble chart. And then if you want to see the distribution of your data, a scatter plot is your best bet, but you can also use line chart and bar chart. And also, if you want to see the individuals that make up a whole, these are the available charts that you can use. So for instance, if you're looking, you want to analyze your data based on gender, you would use a pie chart to visualize the distribution of your population, to say that 50% of my population not 50, 20% of my population is male and 80% of my population is female. So it's best to use when you want to see different parts that make up 100%, basically. And then this is an example of what you can create once you follow those first two steps. And this is it can be an example of a good or bad choice. So let me just give a scenario here. So let's say you have a data set of learner performance for grade 5, term 2, 2022. So you have that data set and you want to visualize it. So the choice here was to use a pie chart to see learner performance. Let's say it's pass rate. So learner performance, looking at pass rate for the different districts. So I want to know from the audience, from the group, if this is a good or bad choice. Are you able to see learner performance for each district here?
You can bad choice. Holly says bad choice, but they haven't said why. So maybe, all of them coming up as bad choice. Maybe if somebody wants to share why they're saying a bad choice, that'd be great. Put their hands up. Tato says, I think a tree map would have been a better choice. Sue, prefer a bar graph.
Okay.
No, percentages, can't understand it.
That's true.
Cheaper, bad, can't tell the actual pass rate.
In the color system.
No share? Lisa doesn't make it easy to see info and interpret it. Jennifer, better as an infographic. Gilbert, too congested. So I think the general consensus is that this is a bad choice for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
And some are giving some alternatives or sort of what is missing from it.
Yeah.
Bad choice.
I do agree that it's a bad choice. And also the use of color. So if you're colorblind, this will literally not mean anything to you, but that's an extreme case. But even if you're not colorblind and you're just visually impaired, so all these blues, there's a lot of blues here, and they may look like the same blue, same shade of blue to another person. And also I do agree that there's no labels or no data points. And just looking at it, you can't even see which district is performing better than the other one. You are not even able to see the actual pass rate. So I do agree with everyone, it's a bad choice. So an alternative, as someone mentioned in the chat, would be a bar chart. So with a bar chart, you, from just first glance, you are able to pick up your top 5 best performing districts, and you're able to see what the actual pass rate is. And you're also able to see the least performing districts and what that pass rate is. So you're able to pick up trends and patterns, and you are able to see the actual data points with a bar graph. So you need to know if you have a lot of indicators, it will be quite difficult to present them in a bar chart, in a pie chart. So your bar chart will be a better choice. However, this visual is still not sufficient. It's just the first step. It's not everything, because you don't know if it's a pass rate. If I didn't tell you that it's learner performance and it's pass rate and the background story, you would not know what you're looking at. And I can just change it. Today can be pass rate, tomorrow I can say it's attendance, teacher attendance, and then the next day I can say it's learner attendance. So it doesn't tell a full story. And then that leads me to my third point, which is the use of heading and text in your visualization to drive the message across. So you can use different fonts. So for the heading, it's big. You want anyone to be able to see it. So it's big. And also because you're focusing on success, the focus is on success and not anything negative or not. Success is bold and big. And then this is, I guess, the less important information. And then you also have subheadings. So if you have subheadings in your visual, use a different color or font size for the subheadings and the headings, and then for the body, keep to a different font size as well to drive the message across. And then the third step is on improving the visual that you would have created using the steps written in steps 1 and step 2. And then Jerusha will take over from here. I don't see any questions. Yeah, so Jerusha, you can take over. I'm going to hand over to you for the last two closing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maps. Yeah, you can continue to share the screen so we don't do waste a few minutes trying to switch over. But hi, everyone. I'm sure that Mmapela has introduced me in the beginning, but I'm Jerusha Govender from Data Innovators and also a data viz and information communication enthusiast and specialist. And so from this part, what Mmapela had shared is really showing you this journey, almost like a thinking journey around how you would think about creating a data viz or an infographic, and actually you could apply this CCIED model with any type of visualization. So at the third point, once you've now, you know who you're presenting your data to, you've chosen how you're going to present it, and you've already started pulling together the data and placing it on your presentation, infographic, or wherever you place it, you then look at how do you improve this. So it allows you to be somewhat messy in the beginning so that you're building for structure, and then only at the end. So rather than trying to make everything look beautiful at the beginning, focus on actually the content. And then at step 3, look at how do you improve on your alignment, the color that you're using, the font or the size of your font, and how do you incorporate images within the presentation, which will really enhance how the data is either interpreted or carry the message across that you're trying to convey with your data. And so I'm going to focus just on the first 2 and then briefly speak to font and images as well. So looking at alignment first, I think Mmapela, you can jump to the next slide. So what alignment is really ensuring that the way you've placed your content, so whether it's charts, text boxes, images, that and your headings, that it's placed in an order that is almost, it makes sense for the reader. So usually your audience is going to read either from top to bottom or left to right. And the natural flow of information should follow that path, so that as the reader follows it, the path that they're following from left to right or top to bottom is the path of your story. If you place it so you'll see the kind of image on the left is well organized and structured, and the one on the right with the X above it is one where the content is quite scattered. And if you place, even if you've got the greatest information and data, if you place it in an order that is hard for us to follow the story, you may have your message lost, or you may have inappropriate interpretation of data because you've got information about one variable that is not related to the next. So that's why alignment is quite important. And even in your standard tools like PowerPoint or the tools we've shared, when you move content around, you'll often see that there's like those dotted lines that appear, and those are indicators for you if it's lining up with the content next to it or above it. And those help you then look at, actually, if I use this grid format, is it easy for me to read from left to right or top to bottom? And then looking at the next component within your improving of your visualization is color. And Mmapela mentioned that with that crazy pie chart, that in fact, if one had certain color blindness, you wouldn't even be able to differentiate between the reds and the blues and so on. And so color is important because one, there's an emotive kind of value to it, but even gradient of color tells us something. Often when we see colors like red, we assume bad, challenge. If we see green, we're like good, achieve the target. And you need to use that color in a sensitive way, because in some ways you might want that interpretations and in others you do not. And so if you've used color in such a way and it's not meant to depict good or bad, make sure that you've chosen the appropriate color. What is also helpful, especially when you know that actually you don't want color to depict a certain kind of good or bad, and you may have an audience that is colorblind, is to use gradient color. So you'll see the example of the table on the right hand side, where we've got dark blue to light blue. So this could be even a gray scale. It allows the reader to be directed to the darkest value first and the lightest value after, compared to the one on the left where we've used red, and our interpretation may be like everything that is red is bad, compared to when it's all dark, it just means like focus there. It does not tell me if it's bad or not. So that's how you could use color. And then you'll see there's also a little tool in the pink box, which is coolest.co. Often we're not quite sure on how to choose colors, or if in fact the colors that we've chosen are not going to be visible or cannot be read by someone with a color blindness. You can use Coolest to test that. So you're able to select different palettes. You can also upload your kind of the color palette you're using to see how it will be viewed in different types of color blindness disorders. And it also gives you options for alternatives if you wanted to use a gradient and so on. So that's color. And I think the only other thing which we'll not speak much about, but there are various resources we can share, is on the fonts. It's the fonts as well as images, which is really making sure that even within your presentation of data is making consistent use of fonts. Because often we sprinkle different types of fonts around, but actually when I see a different font, it's telling me that actually there's something unique about this. So if I see something bold, it's saying draw your attention here. Again, be sensitive about how you are doing that you don't have 5 different font sizes, because each time I see a difference, it's signaling to the reader that you must view this in a different way, that maybe this is a subcategory of information, or maybe this is more important. So that's some considerations for font. And then just looking at an example, so onto the next slide. So this is just an example of 2 options, again, just to test your thinking. If we think about some of the steps we've now discussed, which is the audience, choosing the right audience and structuring your content in a way that's kind of useful to that audience. We spoke about creating and making the right chart choices, as well as some improvements. This is 2 charts with the same information, and perhaps this is information from a research study, and we were looking at the participation of males and females in a adolescent-focused intervention as the context. You'll see that the data is presented on the left, and it's again presented on the right. Based on what we've shared, what would you say is good and bad about the 2 charts that you're seeing, even though they both are presenting the same info? And you can just share a few thoughts in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds. And think about the points we made about color, alignment, chart choice, audience. And the audience in this case we'll say is the programmatic team. It's the team that's designing the adolescent intervention.
Not seeing any feedback at the moment.
Perhaps we are still thinking it through.
Yes.
Do you think they are both bad? That's also okay. But I would like to know why.
Holly's saying they're not color gradients.
Mhm.
Tato, the color gradient on the chart on the right doesn't add more information.
Okay. So thank you. They are both difficult. Fair point. So I think what is important, so the one on the left is a definite kind of, this is not the appropriate way to present it. You could present the data like this, but often if we want to see, so firstly, some of the issues are that when we want to see the kind of the parts of the whole, the ideal way of presenting it is in either kind of a stack chart or a pie chart or something that shows us what does the whole piece look like and then how is it broken up. When you try to present, so in this case, we wanted to see what's the differences between age groups. And also gender. If I present them as bars next to each other, it makes it difficult for me to then compare male and female somewhat and see like actually how much does this make up out of the whole? If I added up all of the female bars, how much bigger is it if I added up the male bars? So that's the one point, that if that is important, you really need to make sure that actually separating the bars might not be the right approach. You'll also note that the axis on the left starts at 10 versus 28. So again, this might be skewing what our interpretation should be. So always double check that, from an axis perspective, is it correct? There are certain instances where it is okay. So usually like the research rule of thumb is start at 0, but it is acceptable in certain cases to start at a non-zero value if it's kind of drawing attention to very subtle change. So like if we know that the change might be like a 0.1 change and that is significant, then we are allowed to kind of either use a different scale or zoom in into that kind of that range. Because if I use the 0 to 100 and a 0.1 is important, I won't be able to visually see that difference. And things like the headings, you're right, those are important, including headings to be able to see what the attempt is on the right. So all the points are taken is that there's an attempt to use a gradient, but there's a specific differentiated color. So they're trying to draw our attention to the, what would you call it, teal, bluey color. So in some cases, it is okay. If you wanted to see the range, it's fine. But here, actually, the gray is not so important. Focus on the teal. And that was the intention. But yet, I do see that for some, it's still not the best interpretation. And there are things like the headings and perhaps the axes that would also add value. So often, we can make improvements, but the improvements that we assume are appropriate for the audience may not always be the best. And so that's also important to always test where we make these improvements to include text and so on, that we've tested it with the audience to make sure actually, is it still more useful when I make these adjustments or not? Okay, and then moving on to the final. So thank you for the other comments. The final, well, the second last step in your process, which is then to look at, now that I've created and I've emphasized the key things using color and arrows and things to point to the key point, we now want to emphasize, and this is where we get to think a bit more like a designer. It's around looking at the overall, is that what was the initial intended message or purpose of this, circling back to what the audience is expecting. So is my audience, am I trying to convey to the audience key lessons? Am I trying to convey to the audience where they should be spending their money? Am I trying to convey to the audience things that must be investigated? And all of this needs to now come together in the final piece. And so when you look at it, you need to look at actually, are there things that I can space in a different way? Because providing space in certain areas allows the reader to focus and not look at like all of the clutter. Are there certain pieces of text or format of text that will allow my key message to come through? Can I incorporate icons to kind of focus the attention on themes? And should I have an explicit call to action? Sometimes this is like an actual statement at the top or the bottom, like keep funding this project, or there's not enough investment, or we need to change the way we focus this program. Sometimes it's a subtle message. It's about how you read the story and you're like, is it actually clear for the audience that this is how they should use the data? Or do I need to put in certain kind of headings that allow them to direct to, background, key points, key actions we need to take, actions for the funder, actions for the program designer. And so those are some ways that you then kind of bring the call to action into place. So just looking at a couple of examples, I think I've spoken a bit about this already, that from the perspective of thinking like a designer, the 3 key areas to think about is first, like, how do I highlight the important stuff? And this can be done through text. So making certain things bold, italics, underlining it, changing the color and the size of certain text. The second is eliminating distractions. So like if you recall the charts we just looked at, there was something that had male, female, blank. Do I need that blank? Is that just an error in my data? Make sure that we don't have these kind of unnecessary pieces of info that actually are not adding any value. And then the last is about accessibility. Have I incorporated visual elements that makes it easy? Like if I've included certain text, sometimes that is not explicit to the audience of what that is. You could include icons or actual like arrows and things that point to how I should actually flow through. There are also other considerations for accessibility, but we won't really dive into that right now. And then just sharing some of the examples. So from a text perspective, you'll see that these are just different ways that if you've included a narrative with your charts, how could I focus or direct the audience to key points? So the first box shows where there's nothing. So I just say no preemptive attributes, everything is gray. So I will read the whole box. Whereas when it's bold, my attention is drawn to that first sentence. What are we doing well? Where things are underlined, you'll see then my attention is drawn to the bottom of the paragraph. You have a great company, keep up the good work. And then the last one with this color, these products are clearly the best in their class. So this is helpful, particularly when you know your audience might not be actually spending too much time on the text. And it's kind of like, if I needed them to put out a few key points, I need to produce the full report, but I need them to see a couple of key things. Using these kind of tactics will help the reader spot those key points. And then I think on the space, maybe I'll move to the icons as an example rather so that I manage time. So icons is also a helpful way of managing when you've got a lot of like a mix of both qualitative and quant data presented. And this is just a little blurb that could be from any report. For example, if there were multiple themes related to your evaluation or your report, that using icons helps pull out what those key themes are. And so here we've got icons that represent electricity, funding, insufficient building space, etc. So that if you've had a lengthy report, or even in your infographic, you could use these and place them so that the reader can then follow through and find, actually, I want to find all of the key points about absence of electricity. And the iconography allows the person to navigate to those points. They're also quite helpful if you use color as well, because then you can layer, you know, if it's gray, it means bad. If it's black, it means good. So adding those layers for interpretation without having to put it in words. And an important thing about using iconography is also just to keep them quite consistent. So you'll see these are all flat icons. They just have difference in color. There are various tools also listed in the top right-hand corner that you can explore. Microsoft has quite a few icons at the moment, but sometimes they're not like culturally sensitive, or they don't fit like very nuanced context. Like if you needed an icon on socioeconomic development, you'd have to be quite creative. But if you go to Flat Icon and Noun Project, they've got quite a few icons that have like different ability, disability representation, gender, and also other social contexts, which are quite helpful. Cool. And then the very last point before I'll just point to some of the tools. So the very last step is around delivery. And this is really like how you tell the story. And it's around looking back at your narrative or the key points within it. And often, or it's how you're presenting back your visualization. So there are two usually in the way we are presenting our data. It's either by a useful way of presenting it is chronologically. So it allows the reader to follow a time series, which is from start to end, or the lead with the ending, which is really what Mmapela had shared, that inverted pyramid. And the inverted pyramid is actually a more journalistic style of writing, or an approach to journalistic style of writing, where it's like you've got a key heading at the top and then the story to follow. And then some of the details are often like read the full report here. And so when you're doing visualization or infographics, often the purpose is to ensure that a key message is conveyed in almost a quicker way. And so we usually would go with a lead and an ending so that our attention is drawn to actually what is the takeaway that we need to use, and then what's the details that support it. So then just jumping to the tools and the platforms. So again, we've included, and we'll share these slides. There's a bunch of tools which are easy to kind of start with. And they also have advanced functionality once you start paying for the advanced things. We use all of these at Data Innovators, and we also use more advanced tools such as Tableau, Odd, and InDesign or Illustrator, because in some cases you want to create a very specific type of visualization. But I would recommend that if you want to test this out, please do go ahead. And there are various other links as well to some of the Data Viz guides, the coolest catalog, etc., that you can access here. And I think just a really quick point is on our data artistry program. I know I'm making you jump around, Mmapela. So there's a bunch of resources. Is that if you are interested in, so we've given you really like a sneak peek into some of the content we teach at our data artistry program. Nolotando is our capability building manager, so you can certainly reach out to her if you are keen to learn more, participate in a future program. Thank you. And I think at that point I will close, and if there are any questions or thoughts, please do drop them in the chat. I'm happy to respond. Otherwise, I'll hand over to you, Margie.
Great, thank you so much. I think just a reminder to everyone that these presentations are shared with Bridge in the meeting highlights. So, you know, there's a lot of information in here, and it's a really useful resource in terms of going back to look at it.
So I'm Leticia Taimo. As Margie said, I work with her at Khulisa Management Services, and really the focus of our work is on evaluations and research, as most of you know. And we also work with organizations to think through how to look at their monitoring data, how to make use of that monitoring data and all of that. So I'm just going to take you through some thoughts that we go through when we have to identify or think through how to present the data in a way that makes sense to whoever it is that we are presenting it to, right? So I guess, like, as an evaluator myself, when I think of it, is really thinking about how to go from this, which is getting the messy data, cleaning it up, and how to present it in a way that makes sense. So if we look at the top bit is, for example, the raw data that comes in through a survey, right, that we regularly administer depending on you know, what project we're doing. And then usually the next step is making sense of this information, so analyzing it, and then it ends up into tables like this if we're using Excel or another stats package. And then as the person engaging with the data is thinking, okay, what is it that we're trying to communicate from this big table, right? So for example, this bottom one was a teacher survey that we did, and it was trying to figure out their qualifications and if they attended any training on the national curriculum framework and things like that. So the first step, and I think this was spoken about in the masterclass, was really thinking about, okay, what is it that we're trying to communicate? What's the message that we're trying to to convey? And part of it is thinking about who we're communicating the message to, how we want to present it. So is it going to be text or using Viz, and the extent of the data visualization that we want to use as well. And this is when I think, sorry, no, it doesn't want to move. Okay. This is when then we think, okay, how do we move from those tables? And now we've analyzed the data and we know that there's some information there, to some of the ideas. So I'll show you some examples of things that we've used, just, you know, but so we can think about it. So in this case, for example, it thinks through it shows some of the responses from the survey that I shared earlier, right? So we could have just written a paragraph that says, you know, like 52.1% of people that responded to the survey said that they gained new insights after participating in this event, right? Related to creativity. sorry, didn't move forward too quickly. But we didn't want to do that. And in this particular instance, the audience was quite a fun, audience. So we knew that they would relate to including emojis as part of that, for example. And that's why we were like, okay, well, let's make this a little bit more playful. We're talking about creativity. We know that the people that are going to read this don't really like to read heavy text, and this would make more sense. And then in addition to that, just by adding this block of blue here at the bottom that makes up the 52.1%, it really draws your eye to the bottom, right? So we have the text explaining what the visual is here on the left. And then at the bottom, just by, adding those visual cues, it also draws your attention to that. And that's where the message is. And that's what we try to communicate. So I think this just shows again, like the process, and back to the masterclass that we just had, that thinking about how do we present this in a way that makes sense. So this is an example. Another example is, for example, for an evaluation for a financial journalism training that we do, we ask people at the end of the training what they thought they knew about financial journalism before they started the program and after. So how do we present this in a way that's not just a table with before and after responses from people, right? And there were 4 different options. And with this visual, it makes it really easy to see that at the top, where the before is, the bigger circles that are proportional to the percentages are bigger on the left-hand side, right? And the left-hand side is where we have people didn't understand financial journalism or had some. And then after the program, which is the bottom line, the circles are bigger towards the right. So again, drawing your attention to the left and the right makes it easy to communicate. This is it. And again, like this is done in PowerPoint, so very easy. We don't need sophisticated tools to visualize it. And this worked really well, and it could have been, flipped on its side if we wanted to. So left to right, thinking about the tips that Jerusha and Mmapela were giving about how to read a graph, right? Top to bottom, left to right. So this is another example. Another example here, it could have just been a paragraph about, whether people disagreed, agreed, or strongly agreed with particular statements after attending a seminar. But instead of that, we use this visual to convey the same type of message. So again, we can see that nobody disagreed with any of the statements on the right, and most of the circles, and again, through the use of color, right, are towards the right-hand side. And then going back to the use of graphs, right? Sometimes it makes sense to have more traditional graphs. So we can have something like a donut graph, like the one that we have here. But then it's changing the font size, changing the color, like Jerusha had mentioned, really drawing attention. So what is the message? We want to say that 63% of participants that had participated in this particular program had expanded their professional network, right? So reported that. So again, it draws your attention, and that's the message, and that's what it means, and it makes sense for the people that are going to receive the message and need to take action. And then we move to something like this, right? So we were talking about individual graphs, but earlier in the masterclass, we also learned that data viz is also about infographics, and it's another way to visualize information. So in this instance is an example of an infographic that summarizes findings from a report. So instead of having a very long evaluation report, thinking about a different audience, right? So maybe the evaluation report is more for the donors or the program implementers, but we still want to communicate findings from this evaluation to the general public. And this is what an infographic is good for. So by incorporating, there's still graphs in the middle of the infographic, right? But then there's still text, there's some icons, there's the use of, like bold and bigger font in certain instances. And we still have all of the information that we want in a way that's more is easily accessible for people. So again, thinking about like who's going to read it, why are we presenting it in this way? And this was a fun thing to do. So it was about a play program, so we could be more playful in the way that we presented the information, right? And I think like at the end of the day is about choosing the right chart or choosing the right means to convey what you're trying to do. And as an evaluator, thinking about how do we really make this information easy for people to understand so that they can take action, right, about that data-driven decision making. And we do this really through an iterative process. So usually it's about trying something out first and then taking it to your peer, right, to your colleague. So it doesn't have to go to the client or the person that's going to use it. It's turning to the person next to you that maybe doesn't know anything about the data that you're presenting and being like, this is what I'm trying to say. Does this make sense? Does it work? What doesn't work? And then if not, then you try again in a different shape that maybe will speak easily for those people. And this is what we do. So, I mean, just an example, this is a graph that we presented to one of our clients. So even the iteration continues, right, with the people that you are producing the graph for. That really we wanted to show if there was like increase in knowledge, you know, reported from people. And we thought, okay, this really makes a lot of sense. And for all of us in the team, it really made a lot of sense. And we could see that for one person here had indicated a decrease in knowledge, and we had the one here and the decrease. So it made a lot of sense. We checked it with our team. And then we submitted to our client, and they felt they really still couldn't understand what this was about. So we said, okay, what are we trying to convey? We're trying to show increase and decrease. So let's try something else. So maybe let's try to simplify it. And then this is, you know, something that make more sense, and it made more sense to the audience that we were communicating, right? So remember that one that decreased that was in the middle, now it's a one, and with an arrow kind of bar chart pointing down, showing that, you know, like had gone from number 5 to a number, you know, like 2.5 or something like that. And so all the ratings on the left, and then showing the increase clearly with an arrow pointing down, decrease with an arrow pointing up and then pointing down. So these are just some things, and I think it's about really being playful in the way that you engage with your data and in the choices that you make to present it, and making it useful for the person that needs to use the data. So maybe it's useful for you, but if it's not useful for the person that's going to use it, then people are not going to adopt this culture of making data-driven decisions, because there will still be a barrier towards understanding what this data is trying to say. So some other tips that are not very complicated, and then after this I will end, is even if it's not about creating graphs, right? And I think Jerusha touched on this towards the end of her presentation too, is that you can change the way your text appears in reports. So sometimes you just need to have a break from paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of writing. This information here is still information that could have been presented in a paragraph, but we turned it into like a little bit of a visual, and it breaks it up, and it makes it easier to read. So something like this is also a nice tip, and something that we incorporate in our reports. And then it also suits what the reader is trying to get out of it. And then similarly, just using icons can also really help people understand what you're trying to say a little bit better, and it makes things a little bit easier to read. So you have your acronym list. You can also have your icon list at the beginning of your report, for example. That'll make people easier to follow the text as they go along, because they'll remember. So for example, on here the thumbs up says it meets standards, or that the target has been met, and thumbs down, not really. And then in the text, you know, by including these icons throughout, it also gives a little bit more white space, and, you know, people can understand just by using something small like this. So we've spoken about more complicated and sophisticated data viz, but these are also like small things that can help people really focus their attention on that specific part of the information that you want to see. And we use this quite a lot. And I've also included here some resources. You're going to get this. Some of them are duplication from what Jerusha is sharing, but it's all there for you. It was already there. And I wanted to share something that's really cool. So Stephanie Evergreen has this interactive data viz checklist that we use sometimes. So you can easily just drag one of the visuals that you create and drop it onto this web-based platform. And then it gives you different scores, and it helps you think through how you can improve your data visualization. So that's just something that's a really cool tip for you to go through and really easy to use too. So that's it from me. I hope that this was good and helpful. I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point.
For people that are new to the COP sessions or the COP workshops, normally at every session we share some tools that we think are, useful resources as well for people to refer to improve, their practice. And in this case, we were looking at data visualization. So we've pulled a few resources that have also been mentioned, through group discussions as well as by the presenters. But the idea is really just to make sure that we are keeping abreast with, new trends, and would be happy for people to share more via chat as we have been, or even, after the session, and we can include and share with everybody. So definitely we heard about Microsoft PowerPoint as well as Excel. I think a lot of people use those to create charts, to create bars, and definitely that helps, with visualizing the data. And I mean, also just to say, Sue mentioned that, there's a good report, Thrive by 5, and I think she'll share the link. But, she said they really give a good breakdown of, provinces. They visualize just, the status of the dire need of, children under 5 years. And she just felt that it's really a good report on just how visualization is used effectively. So Power BI is also one of the softwares that has come up, in discussion. And as mentioned, Akezo put his hand up. So if people, need any more information, any support, he's available to help. And he mentioned that there is like an NGO version that people can definitely, tap into. Picture charts, Mmapela mentioned it as well. It's also quite a good software to use. And I mean, just to mention, while some of this come, of course, at a cost, they do have free trials that, people can sort of play with. But of course, I mean, in the longer run, you want to find something that will be more effective for your organization. So play around and see which makes sense. Tableau, as mentioned, it's also coming up as one of the, platforms or software that is commonly used for visualization, but it's actually also quite more comprehensive in that it also allows for data collection, analyzing, and manipulation, if you like. I also found a link, Capterra. So they actually, it's almost like they package a variety of softwares across, be it for data analysis, data collection. So I just put the link here. So if people just go on it, search for it on Google, you'll see that, you can search for software by category. Visualization is also part of it. And then you can see what options they have. But I mean, I'd say at face value, I think Power BI is coming up as Power BI and Picture Chart, I think, are coming up as those that are probably, that would be more convenient, and they may probably be cheaper in comparison to, of course, your Tableau, if you like. But PowerPoint and Excel, I think most people have access to that, then they're definitely also worth using. We also found resources on LinkedIn and YouTube. I think YouTube is always a great platform for people to go to see videos. And Visme was also mentioned by Mmapela. I think if people go on it and just, see how to do data visualization, they really, it's tutorials. You can see how to navigate and how to best visualize your data and make it appealing for your various audiences. There's also on LinkedIn, a channel called Data Visualization Society. So if you follow it, then you can just see, what tips they have, and any sessions also they have that, could just help people improve their data visualization practice. There's also a great guru, Stephanie Evergreen, yes, or yeah. She also really does quite amazing infographics and, visualization of data. I think if people just follow her, I am now following her myself, you can actually get really great tips to help you better visualize your data. Yeah, I think that's what we have for now in the interest of time. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you so much. And just to punt Khalisa's Eval Tuesday tips and a blog, also have a look on our website. I see they were posted earlier on in the chat box. But also some interesting tips and resources in that. So thank you very much.